If you hear those words, it's already too late. Noriaki Kakyoin is considered top 1 in heritage for the future, and I've talked about him many times, but I can't help but feel that none of these discussions have ever done him justice. Kakyoin is broken, no doubt, and what allows him to supersede every other character in the roster is a multitude of things that cause him to shine as a versatile beast who makes the meta his bitch. However, there are 2 other characters in the game who resemble Kakyoin, visually and in some ways gameplay-wise. If you can believe it, all 3 of these characters are incredibly strong. The main purpose of this video was to cover new Kakyoin, but I feel that in order to do that, a revisit of the original is necessary, so let's do just that. Kakyoin is, as stated before, often put smack dab at the top of most tier lists. The only other character in that position is Pet Shop, and both characters are commonly banned in most tournament rule sets. I've mentioned this before, but most people already know Pet Shop is broken and banned because of unblockables, so what could possibly make Kakyoin even stronger? The first thing to highlight is his mobility. Kakyoin is an active stand character and fights alongside Hierophant Green. Whether in stand on or stand off, he's capable of traversing the screen very fast. His dashes are incredibly fast and travel very far, both forward and backward. Kak's forward dash, if held, basically lets him travel full screen, and his back dash does the same. This not only makes his maneuverability very strong, but gives his dash normals even more utility. In stand-on mode, Kakyoin has a double jump as usual, but he can also air dash. Kakyoin's air dash travels far and he has good normals for starting offense with instant air dashes. More importantly, Kakyoin is, for some reason, able to perform this air dash an infinite amount of times. Combined with double jumps and a special move I'll talk about in even greater detail later, Kak is able to camp better than almost anyone on the roster. If you want to play lame, Kakyoin is your guy. Generally, people who want to point out how busted Kak's normals are will highlight his stand-on normals, but even without Hierophant Green, his normals are still very strong. 5A is his fastest normal and a very solid jab. It's 3 frame startup and recovers extremely fast, making it good at close range, and you can use it to start combos. 2A is similarly strong and decently fast with 5 frame startup. It hits low and can start combos. Also, it has an odd quirk where you can cut the recovery by letting go of down, which improves the advantage on hits slightly. Not sure if this is actually helpful, but hey, you can do it. 5C, so okay. This game's button structure is ABCS, A being light, B is medium, C is heavy, and S being your stand button. In most fighting games, heavy buttons are longer ranged and more damaging, but also have longer startup to compensate. Kakyoin 5C is 4 frame startup. It's faster than 2A and 5B. Kak 5C is pretty incredible. Even outside of the fast startup which lets Kak link it out of his light normals, it also sports an incredible hitbox. The disjoint and speed make it one of the best close range buttons he has, and it's cancelable into supers and specials. You can also cancel it into Kak's roll, which lets him save himself from getting whiff punished by certain supers. Going back to his mediums, 5B is a bit weird as Kak has 2 of them, one at close range and one at long range. Neither are particularly good. Close 5B has a good hitbox for anti-airing, but because they need to be close to you, it's pretty situational. Fire 5B is just a kick that's slower than 5C and does less damage. For a poke, it's generally outclassed by other tools. 2B is pretty good though, as it's fast and hits low, but isn't advantageous enough to link into anything unfortunately. 2C does 2 hits, the first hitting low and the second knocking down. Its good range and the knockdown is nice, just be careful about the slow startup. Kak's dash normals are very similar to his standing normals, with the same animations and similar frame data, but because of his incredible forward and back dashes, they're all pretty good for getting in. In the air you have JA and JB, both of which are pretty fast and have nice hitboxes. JA is a higher up hitbox, making it slightly better for air dares, while JB is better suited to jump-ins, but they're both great. JC is once again faster than his other 2 air normals, but where this normal excels is stand crashing. This shit does like half a stand gauge on hit, and on block it's pretty good too. If you're fighting someone who's in stand on, use it. Kak's throw is worth highlighting as it causes a hard knockdown, which lets him get Oki off it in the corner. And believe me, getting knocked down is not something you want to do against this character. Alright, now let's talk about his stand on buttons. This is where things start getting absurd. First of all, I mean, just fucking look at this. The range on some of these normals is insane, and good Christ these disjoints. Compare these to Alessi's stand-on normals, which are also extremely long-ranged, and we can observe what top-tier privilege truly is. He can perform these out of a dash too, in case you were dissatisfied with the range. Despite how insane his longer-range normals are, we can't gloss over his shorter-ranged buttons. Stand 5A is very fast, tied with some others for his fastest button at 3-frame startup. It's one of Kak's best starters for his combos and pressure, making him one of the hardest characters to contest at close range when he's in stand-on. Use it, it's an incredible tool. Similarly, stand 5B is also a great close range button, which might seem weird as the range is really good, but it also has fast startup. It has 2 hits. They don't combo into each other, but the hitbox on the second hit is amazing. This is Kak's go-to anti-air, and altogether makes for a wonderful button that Kak will be using plenty in scrambles. Stand 5C is also very fast, the same startup as stand 5A for some reason. Nice little poke. It should be noted that while Kak's normals, both in stand on and stand off, are notable for their more broad utilities like damage, range, and their bonkers hitboxes, they're also busted because he can special cancel so many of them. I'll explain why this is important later, don't worry. One final obnoxious little normal Kak has is stand J3X. This is a command normal he can activate with any of the 3 attack buttons and acts sort of like Dalsim's drill, quickly traveling downward and hitting overhead. It's very good for his mix-ups thanks to how close he can do it to the ground. Now for Kak's specials, there's one primary move that if you have even the most vague knowledge of this character, you're eagerly awaiting for me to talk about. We'll get to it later. Gotta build up that anticipation, you know? 236X or stand 236X is the iconic Emerald Splash. Both versions are projectiles, but the standoff version is more like a wimpy little poke with poor range and damage. Hierophant Green lingers during the recovery, and even though Kak can attack while he's still on screen, he loses access to any normals that use his stand until Hierophant Green is completely gone, which is pretty lame. The stand-on version is thankfully much better. This is a real projectile that travels full screen and hits 8 times. It's good as a combo ender and to harass people, and it has mad pushback on block. It does take a little while to start up, on top of the time the projectiles actually take to travel, so it shouldn't form the crux of your Kak game plan. That's for a different special. A fun little tidbit about all of Kak's specials is that Kak will perform one of 5 poses upon doing them. This is mostly just for visual variety, but one of them actually does have a slightly slower recovery. It's random which one you get, but it can cause certain combos to drop, so watch out. Tai Rap Snake 46214X is a move you might struggle to use as the input is pretty tricky, but it's still hella stylish. Hierophant's arm stretches along the ground and will entangle anyone it touches, during which you can slap him up in any way you desire. After a while, the opponent will get launched away and wall bounced, which you can combo off of. Pretty nice move for combo extensions, but Kak has better and less awkward options in standoff. Note that if you don't hit them fast enough, any character caught inside can mash left and right fast enough to escape. With stand-on wrap, Kak instead fires Emerald Splashes at the opponent for a generally worse reward, including the fact that it doesn't always cause a knockdown. Kak has quite a few supers including both stand-on and off. Super Emerald Splash, 236AA. Okay, so I'm going to add a warning for this in the opening, but if you suffer from epilepsy, please for the love of God skip this section, and also don't play this character, or new Kak for that matter. Seriously, the bright white flashing lights when this super hits is just obnoxious. This super is a general use combo ender for the most part. Kak can move during the standoff version, which you can use to get in if the opponent blocks it. 214AA is India's arm, a rather weird move that changes a lot based on whether or not you have your stand out. The standoff version sends Hierophant's tentacles out in one of many different patterns, depending on which 2 buttons you use to initiate the super. If you perform it with A, B, and C at the same time, it'll draw a star. Cute, but this is not the star of the show. Actually, it's pretty bad. I'm not sure what the purpose of this was supposed to be. It'll stand crash on hit, which is nice, but the hits rarely connect properly, which leads to characters falling out of it all the time before the attack finishes. Kak is fully vulnerable while performing it, and the hitbox is only located on the arm of the tentacles, so anyone who manages to get by it, which isn't that hard, is gonna tan your fucking hide. Also, some of the patterns are even more worthless in the corner, as the arm will go off screen for an extended period of time. Stand-on India's arm is fully controllable by the player. It has high damage potential and it's much easier to keep Kak safe while it's in use, but it's still not that useful due to the inconsistencies in damage and hits and the fact that Kak is toast if the opponent gets to him before he can cover himself with the tentacle. Hierophant Finish and Punishment Time are both stand-on only. The former's input is 623AA and it's not that great. First of all, the range for the initial hit is pathetic, which makes it very hard to connect. You can combo into it, but there's little flexibility in the routes you get with it due to the small range. Also, like with India's arm, it's not very consistent. Some hits of the final Emerald Splash that Kak does at the end will sometimes just not connect, so the damage this super does will change radically sometimes. Ultimately, it's pretty impractical. Punishment Time has the same input as Akuma's Raging Demon and is a command throw just like that move. It can be jumped, but there are setups to land it guaranteed. It's pretty solid and does give you Oki on hits. Just be careful because if it's jumped, you will suffer. So I blue-balled all of you long enough with this stuff. Let's get to the main attraction. This is 214X Hierophant's Field, known by the community as Net. Oft considered to be the absolute best move in the entire game. This is the bow that wraps up Kak's very strong kit and makes him such a menace. You see him do this move in neutral, on offense, defense, and by this point you've probably seen it in your nightmares. At the same time, there's nothing outwardly broken about it on first glance. In fact, when I first played the game in 2019 and tried Kakyoin outs, I had no fucking clue how to use these things. The deeper you dive, the more obvious the strengths of nets become, so let's waste no time. 214X will set a net down on screen. They're invisible for some reason, so keep in mind that you'll need to remember the position when you set them down. Each button will put its respective net at a slightly different point on the screen. A is slightly in front of him, C behind him, and B right on top of him. Nets will immediately activate upon being placed down, but you can delay this by holding down the button used to place the net. If you keep the button held down, it'll remain there for a period of time. Anyone who's never played this game want to guess how long? If you said 29 seconds, then you absolutely looked it up. Shame on you. Yeah, these things last for an insane amount of time, although realistically you're going to end up releasing it before that point. There is a cooldown after a net hits though, so keep that in mind. That's about the gist of how they work, so how do you use them? On hit, nets will ensnare the opponent and keep them stunned for quite some time. Essentially, if they hit, you get a free combo, and Kakyoin's nets also cause a guaranteed stand crash. It's hard to pin down one thing that's the most busted about them, but I would say that in a vacuum, what makes nets so broken is their versatility. There isn't a single part of Kakyoin's game plan that nets do not contribute to. Kak already has very good normals up close for pressure and tech chasing, but that becomes even more evident when he has nets up. Since Kakyoin can full combo off of nets, they demand lots of respect when Kak is pressuring you. Trying to mash, push block, or roll out of his pressure can all be punished by nets, and since they're mega plus on block and push block, even just trying to block it out is fruitless. With his instant air dash and variety of tricky overheads and lows, Kakyoin gets very strong mix off of a blocked net, so trying to maintain defense against Kak is really not an option. I mentioned earlier that Kak's normals are so good because they can be special cancelled, and nets are precisely why. Anything you block from Kak will be followed by a net, which makes his offense very oppressive. There's really not a single answer to this situation because Kak can do so many things here and is rewarded in almost all scenarios, and before anyone brings it up, yes, nets can be cut by certain attacks, but never minding that some characters can't even do that, which I'll get into later, this is still not a foolproof answer to nets in the slightest. Remember, Kak can control when the nets activate, so not only can he preempt your button and snag you, but he can also just whiff punish whatever button you use to cut the net down. And that's not even mentioning how much reward Kak gets for his correct guesses in net scrambles. When you have a net up, you have the advantage in almost any situation on offense. Oh, and I mean, nets as an Oki tool. Do I even need to explain this? Waking up into a blocked net into a 50-50? That's top tier privilege. On defense, they're just as scary. Nets excel as a tool for screen control, and when paired with Kakyoin's already fantastic mobility and ability to turtle, chasing the green man down becomes an even harder task, especially since, again, if you overextend and get hit or block a net, you either eat a high damage combo or a mix-up. It shouldn't take much knowledge of the game to realize why a fast, low commitment move with such insane screen control utility that gives Kak a full combo or mix-up and lets him remain advantageous in almost any situation, offense or defense, is so busted. The only real flaw outside of the cooldown is that Kak has to sacrifice at least one of his attack buttons to keep a net in play, but that barely matters because he has cracked normals on A, B, and C. This plays into Kakyoin's matchups. Even though Kak is so strong, he obviously still has to try versus most top tiers as they also have very strong buttons, damage, and Oki, but his remarkable versatility lets him adapt on the fly against any situation. No, I want to talk more about the low tier side of things, and I know that it should be obvious that the best character in the game beats most low tiers, but it's much more evil than it might come across at first. So, as mentioned earlier, Kakyoin's nets can be cut down. If you hit them with the stand type attack, the net will be removed from the screen. The rules of this are a little strange and inconsistent. For example, despite many of Alessi's normals using his stand to attack, many of his stand-on normals just straight up don't affect nets, so his only method of cutting them down is stand JA. Honestly though, Alessi and some other characters with limited net cutting methods have it good, because there are some characters who straight up cannot cut them at all. Being able to cut them is the one solace to the havoc they wreak, and some characters straight up do not have that luxury. In a world where Mariah, Whole Horse, Young Joseph, and some others are already disadvantaged with passive stands and weaker kits, this is just like rubbing salt in the wound and then shooting it. Other characters like Alessi and Old Joseph struggle with pinning Kak down because of his strong defensive play, and like I said, he can switch between being the aggressor or the defender very seamlessly. Kak's kit and game plan are immensely open-ended. Nets alone allow him to do so many different things, and you can add his other more eccentric tools like his Raging Demon or Tai Rap Snake for extra style. It's a shame he's banned from most tournaments since he's very cool, but the oppressive control Nets give him over a match, as well as the amount of characters that legit might as well not be on the fucking character select when you're playing Kak, are seriously something else, especially when combined with all his other strengths. He's the best at everything, as some might summarize it. So what happens if your favorite character happens to be Kakyoin, but you can't play him in tournament due to the ban? You put on the shades. Kakyoin, who overcame his fears, known by the community as New Kak or NKak for short. He's one of the 6 secret characters. Seeing the extreme visual similarity between both Kaks, it's reasonable to assume the two are simply clones of each other. The reality is, this couldn't be any farther from the truth. Much like with the two Josephs, while their kits do contain very similar attacks, both Kakyoins have many differences and ultimately are playing very different games. If you decide to go from Kak to New Kak and all you plan on doing is running the same game plan, you're gonna have a bad time because New Kak's tools do not lend themselves to playing the game the same way regular Kak does and vice versa. New Kak is definitively considered a worse character than the original model, but he's still very strong. Don't think of New Kak as a flat downgrade, consider him a different character altogether. The biggest similarities between the two Kakyoins mostly lie in their standoff normals. For the most part, they share extremely similar damage and frame data, with some minor differences like New Kak 5C being 1 frame faster to start up. Where things start to pivot is with stand-on normals. Whereas Kakyoin's stand 5A is a 3 frame jab, New Kak's is 9 frame startup. It's okay, with the range, hitbox, and damage opportunities not really making up for the slow startup. Other normals are different in regards to hitboxes and range, but New Kak still has lots of amazing stand-on pokes in spite of this. Stand 5B, Stand 5C, and Stand 6B are all great pokes to throw out in neutral, and he still has that infamous Stand 2C with godly range and a nice knockdown on hit. Stand 4C deserves mention for being one of his best up-close options. It's 3 frame startup. I'm not entirely sure why they made this faster than Stand 5A, but it's real good. It shreds stand gauge and it's a very strong normal for hit confirming, especially in the tandem. New Kak mostly shares his specials with Kak. Emerald Splash 236X is mostly the same in standoff, but the stand-on version is much weaker. It doesn't travel nearly as far, which ultimately makes it pretty useless as a projectile. Tai Rap Snake is a pretty unwieldy move for regular Kakyoin because of the input, but New Kak's Tai Rap Snake has a much easier input of 214X. It proves to be one of his most pivotal specials for damage when he's in standoff, and it's an important part of his B&Bs as a result. It also knocks down, which gives him Oki. However, because this move is so important to him and confirms, it also becomes victim to the problem of pose RNG. Remember when I mentioned how out of the different poses Kakyoin assumes when performing his specials, one of them has more recovery? New Kak has this problem too, and because tie wrap is more important to him in B&Bs, it can screw him over much harder. And it's all up to RNG, unfortunately. Finally, we have Net. It's a terrifying thought to have 2 characters on the roster with this ungodly move, but make no mistake, New Kak's nets are definitely much weaker than the original. There are 2 major reasons for this. The first is the properties on hit. While the A net acts mostly the same as Kakyoin's, the B and C nets actually launch the opponent on hit, which the opponent can tech out of. This makes the combos New Kak gets from these nets hitting severely limited, which in turn makes them much less threatening in neutral as well. There is one advantage of New Kak's nets that the original doesn't have, which is that New Kak's nets are unscaled, which makes his damage out of a net starter much higher. A net is still very scary, but the fact that you can only really threaten with 1 net position is definitely a bummer. On the bright side, since your light normals aren't that great for neutral, you don't give up much sacrificing them to keep A net held down. The other problem is that unlike regular Kak, New Kakyoin's nets are only usable in stand-on. You must have Hierophant Green out to use his nets. This isn't a problem for the move itself, but more for New Kak's overall game plan. Kakyoin is able to make himself extremely threatening in standoff because of his ability to special cancel his normals into nets, and New Kak not being able to do this definitely makes him much weaker. Note that you can set up a net and stand on, and then go into standoff while the net is up, but this doesn't really solve the problem I just mentioned. Despite the reduced reward on hit and weaker properties, New Kak nets are still a solid tool for combo extension, screen control, and laming, and although being unable to summon them in standoff sucks, it's less of an issue because New Kak as a whole prefers to be in stand-on mode for most of a match. Let's talk about the real game changer and what sets New Kak apart from regular Kakyoin. While he maintains the amazing standoff dash and the infinite air dashes in stand-on, the big new thing New Kak has is a totally different grounded forward and back dash in stand-on. Rather than moving him directly left or right, New Kak's stand-on dash sends him upward at a diagonal angle, similar to Jeddah in Vampire Savior. Now at first glance, it can seem quite unimpressive, the slow rise into the air and slow fall down. But this is a dangerous movement option that gives New Kak some of the strongest mix in the game. New Kak's dash can be cancelled during the animation period, and you can do this extremely early to cut the momentum and pretty much turn the damn thing into a short hop. The normal typically used to set this up is stand JB, which truly shines since it becomes a very fast and hard to block overhead option when performed quickly out of New Kak's dash. Constantly performing stand 6-6B looks silly, but it's actually a very effective way of moving around the screen, and if the overhead hits, you can easily convert into a combo for a nice little knockdown and begin to set up New Kak's extremely dangerous mix-ups. Cross-up or same side is very hard to see with him, as are ambiguous high-lows thanks to stand J3X, which you can perform early after a jump to fool the opponent into thinking he's going to do an overhead and go for a low. Stand 665B is also a great mix-up option, especially when combined with his low-hitting stand 2B. Having a net up helps tremendously as he can keep New Kak safe if the opponent blocks his mix-ups. The best part is, it's very easy for him to end these combos with a knockdown and loop into even more mix-ups, which is known as a vortex. New Kak is all about switching on the fly between his strong offense and his strong neutral control. His stand-on buttons are all great poking options, so his mid-range game is one of the best, and he has nets as a safety net and a method of playing lame, but after a knockdown he can start up his vortex and deal some very high damage. His combos are generally shorter than regular Kaks because of the nerfed nets, but he gets lots of openings with his mix-ups to alleviate the issue somewhat, and he can convert off of a lot of things, especially when he has a full screen super. He also has unblockable resets, which helps a lot. Also remember to mix in his standoff tools. Wrap is a very sneaky pressure tool and he gets good damage and Oki off of it. You can delay when the wrap comes out, which can be a tricky way to scare people into playing suboptimally in neutral. While New Kak's game plan is very strong and can be hard to deal with, there is one big monkey wrench in the operation. New Kak is one of the worst defense values in the game. This is why you need to make sure to remain defensive and neutral. New Kak is very good at camping with a life lead, but one right guess on his Oki or a simple mistake on his part can allow his opponent to yank that health away and cost him the life lead or even the round. It's less of an issue considering New Kak can and often does spend shitloads of time in the air, allowing him to avoid full combo punishes, but be careful, especially if you're going to be spending lots of time in stand-on mode. One stand crash could be all it takes for the victory to slip out of your hand and into the opponent's. As I said, he's a very different character from regular Kakyoin, having a less rewarding and safe game plan. He's definitely more of a risky character to play due to his low defense, but his very strong vortex, great screen control with his buttons and net, and great mobility make him flexible and give him ways to escape most situations. He's not so much a worse version of Kakyoin, because like I said and just described, he's a very different character, but he's still very cool. He spent many years as a borderline top tier, but heavy optimization by Project Potato, the most active new Kakyoin player, have allowed him to rise up the tiers recently and solidify his place as one of the most feared characters on the roster. And also he has a cool ass pair of sunglasses. That alone makes him worthy of being top 5. To close this out, we have Rubber Soul. Bearing the stand Yellow Temperance, a big old yellow blob of goo that he can shape into whatever he wishes. Rubber is another secret character and the second to mimic Kakyoin. Now Robert does use Yellow Temperance to mimic Kakyoin in the manga, but Capcom's design for him in their game was just to make him a yellow and slightly taller Kakyoin. Okay then. Rubber bears a visual resemblance to Kakyoin, but make no mistake, much like with New Kak and honestly even more so, he's a completely different character. Despite shared animations and maybe some similar specials, he's his own character with a radically different game plan. Rubber Soul is a passive stand character, but he manages to defy the odds by being a passive stand that isn't whack. In fact, he's very strong, although it wasn't always that way. He was once regarded as a low tier, but like with New Kak, dedicated Rubber players have optimized him and his reputation has improved tremendously. Now I haven't been playing this game that long, I got back into it like last year, but even back then I always found the old tier placement of Rubber kind of insane. He does have some notable flaws, and being a passive stand does weigh him down, but as a whole this character is crazy, and if I'm being honest, I fucking hate fighting him. Unimportant though, let's get to the goods. Rubber's normals mimic Hierophant Green, which means many of them share the same long range and disjoints, although his normals are for the most part distinct from Kaks and New Kaks. Rubber's got fast jabs he can convert off of, with his 2A in particular being very good to work into his offense. You definitely don't want to get hit by this. 5B is an excellent anti-air and poke, 2C is very strong and grants a hard knockdown. The real moneymaker though is JA. It was a solid normal for Kak and New Kak, and Rubber's has a very similar hitbox. The major difference is that Rubber JA has infinite active frames. From the moment he presses the button until he lands, Rubber JA will remain active, and since he can start combos off of it in the air and on the ground even off a high connect, it's an extremely powerful jump in, air to air, and just a great button as a whole. It does lack vertical coverage though, so watch out for anti-airs. Worth highlighting is Rubber's throw, which is also pretty incredible, building meter, which is something only Rubber's throw does, and also being the highest damage throw in the game. Strike throw with this character is certainly very effective, as the reward for landing a throw is high. As a passive stand, Rubber's S button does various attacks involving his yellow Hierophant green. With these, he gains access to some very long range pokes, which he can move alongside and cancel out of his other normals, which makes a lot of his S moves highly plus on block. Rubber can use them in his pressure for extremely suffocating sequences that can be tough to escape even with push blocking, and in some case, he can land unblockable resets with JS and 2S. Some of these setups only work on stand-on characters, but an unblockable is an unblockable and lets him capitalize for great reward on the launching properties of some of his S normals. 6S is a great poke, 5S is a good ender since it does a hard knockdown, and 4S is an amazing button with many uses as an anti-air, combo extender, and also allows him to set up unblockable resets. Rubber has a solid projectile with 236X which you can use to start combos with, but the main standouts of his specials are 214X, the wrap, and 214S, the counter. The wrap is similar to New Kak's wrap, but with slightly faster startup. Like with New Kak, you can sneak it in during neutral to catch people walking back since it hits low, and once it hits, Rubber gets a free combo. Combos into the wrap can be very damaging since you can end it with his supers, so do watch out to avoid getting snatched up. If you don't hit the opponent fast enough, they can mash out of the wrap, so be quick about it. The counter, oh my god. This is a tool that is extremely strong and extremely annoying. Rubber's counter is 2-frame startup and activates on all strikes. It's active for a very long time, and on hit, it guarantees a stand crash and launches for a combo. This truly is a scary tool to deal with. Obviously it can be baited and punished, but just a bit of delay can allow Rubber to use it again and counter your punish attempt, which is so fucking irritating. The damage he gets from it with meter is also pretty insane, which makes it extremely rewarding. Just remember that there is risk involved. You can be punished for whiffing it, and it's also weak to throws and projectiles. Rubber's 236A is one of the most dangerous supers in the game, sending a volley of full screen projectiles out. It gives Rubber an extremely easy way to advance in neutral since he can move while the projectiles are flying out. Being able to combo off the counter and wall bounce from the wrap lets Rubber get very high damage, and even on block it does a serious chunk. In case you pesky active and weapon stands were thinking about going into stand-on mode to nullify the chip damage, it also does massive stand gauge damage on block, so good luck with that. It's a very powerful super at far distances, but be wary of the long startup. While not a factor at full screen, doing this up close is basically asking for the opponent to roll through you and punish the super. His other super, incidentally, is solely a close range tool. 360X is Coconut Backbreaker. With a hilarious name and even funnier inspiration, it's a short-ranged command throw that does a sizable chunk of damage on hit. It's jumpable after the flash, so use it sparingly in your pressure. There are setups you can do in your Oki to make it harder for the opponent to deal with, but remember that you also have a regular throw that, while not as damaging and also not techable, builds meter instead of spending it. Also, it's a very solid wake up and combo ender. The weirdest thing about this super is the effect on hit. It launches, but because of an odd quirk in the game's code, this launch changes between being techable and untechable. The basic gist is that there's a value which decides whether a move will cause a techable knockdown or not. This value usually gets changed by certain moves when they hit, but the Backbreaker does not do this. This means that whether Coconut Backbreaker can be teched or not is dependent on the last move you hit the opponent with and whether or not it caused an untechable launch. Definitely something to keep in mind as it can be punished on hit if teched. Rubber is considered a grappler by many people, and a big part of that is his strong emphasis on Okizeme with both high-low as well as strike-throw. Rubber has numerous ways to land a hard knockdown, and his mix off a knockdown is very strong. Making the opponent have to guess between a low 2A or a delayed JS after a jump is very scary because Rubber can combo off of both, and even when the opponent is blocking, JA can make for some very tricky setups as you can either go into a 2A or cancel JA into JS. What makes Rubber's mix-up so strong is his ability to seamlessly combo into a hard knockdown and put them right back in the guessing game. You can throw in his very strong throw to threaten the opponent further, and his counter is great for calling out attempts to counterpoke during his pressure. Rubber's Vortex can be very difficult to escape from, and he has many options to keep the opponent guessing, not to mention his Vortex doesn't have to be modified to account for different wake-up timings or character heights. His unblockable resets help in that regard as well and give him great damage potential in certain situations. However, since Rubber ideally wants to be close to his opponent so he can get a hit and knock the opponent down, he struggles at longer ranges. The flaw in Rubber that immediately stands out is his mobility. it's real bad. His dash is extremely poor, and although JA makes his air approach okay, that's also fairly committal. This forces Rubber to either use meter on his super to get in, or slowly make the journey into the opponent's face, using his normals to poke and his counter to call out other characters' pokes. He can counter poke with the best of them, but this still gives other characters more chance to play their game, which obviously isn't good for Rubber. Rubber has to play neutral very defensively due to his speed, and that's where he excels. Even when he's defending, he's very good at slipping out of these situations, not only because of his counter, but his guard cancel, which is one of the best in the game. He gets Oki off of it, it's extremely fast, and its stand crashes on hit. Use these tools and Rubber becomes much harder to pressure. Another problem he suffers from is the limitations of his Vortex. Although his looping mix-ups are very strong, Rubber gets limited damage off of them because he cannot combo into the wrap afterward, so his higher damage can be a little more situational than some others. Also, he's a passive stand. He's good enough for it to not doom him completely, but it's still a flaw as he has no way to nullify chip damage or knockdowns, and he doesn't have access to tandems. Rubber's limited vortex damage means that in many situations, he has to make a lot of right guesses, but he can control space very well, so returning to neutral if the opponent escapes the vortex isn't the worst thing ever, and his many strong defensive options lets him gain access to Oki's too. Some matchups can be tough for him as some characters have strong wake-up supers to counteract his Oki, and some characters have a much easier time dealing with this pressure due to their good buttons and good mobility. Rubber may lack the same explosive offense and damage other characters above him have, and it might take him several interactions to win games, but his extremely strong and consistent Oki and his great defense make him very scary to deal with. Just keep cool and continue breaking the opponent's defense down, and they'll eventually succumb to the power of Yellow Temperance. So that's the 3 Kakyoins. When I first got into Heritage for the Future, I was under the impression that new Kakyoin and Rubber Soul were just inferior clones of the original, but having finally done research and watched them, I'm glad I can finally understand the two better now. It really gives me a lot of respect and admiration for how Capcom designed these 3 characters. While they share many moves, they all end up being 3 very different characters with completely distinct gameplay, yet they all still feel complete. Not to mention, they're all very cool. Even though he makes me very mad, I gotta admit Rubber is pretty neat. This was a fun video and I'm glad I got to both revisit Kakyoin again and talk about why he's considered top 1, as well as go into more detail on new Kakyoin and finally talk about Rubber Soul. Hope you all enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching, have a great night, and take care. Hey guys, this is the part of the video where I thank my YouTube channel members. So thank you to Old Man Han, Triangle God, Cammy the Killer, Jazba, Mortis, Isaac the Collector, Arg, Seals, Wormy, Terry Hints, and Perfect Orange. Sorry that this took a while. I ended up working on a video for a few days that I ended up scrapping. That, combined with some other things, ended up making this a pretty hectic week for me. So apologies if this took longer than expected, but I hope you all enjoyed. Thank you for watching and have a great night.